What's up, everybody? Coach Daisha here, bringing you this week's hot topic. Before we actually get started, I just need to address the fact that I'm sitting on my children's favorite blue activity table. Because I'm not going to lie, I just didn't feel like going and getting a chair. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, today's hot topic is going to address some of the most common myths surrounding exercise movements with osteoporosis. I've got 5 for you today, and I want to hopefully go through this particular episode and let you know that a lot of these are truly myths. So I want to break them down, let you know why they are myths, what you can do instead, and hopefully empower you to keep moving without fear. So let's get started. All right. So myth number 1 is that any form of forward bending is dangerous. Now, to say the word any or to use the word all forms of forward bending is what would make this a myth, because we as humans are going to have to forward bend at some point. It's just inevitable. Things are on the ground, or maybe we even have to get to the ground. Whatever the reason may be, forward bending is inevitable in our lives. So the main reason that this has traction, the main reason that this is out there and that most people with osteoporosis believe it, is because if anybody has ever suffered a fracture, especially in the lumbar spine, that is going to be one of the first restrictions that they are given, that forward bending is going to either exacerbate that condition or possibly cause future fractures. So once one person hears that, everybody else is going to assume, well, I have osteoporosis too. That means I can't forward bend either. So when it comes to forward bending, we really have to emphasize the fact that form and technique matter the most. All right. So for most people who are forward bending, they may be doing it inadequately. They may be doing it to the point where they are truly using their lumbar spine to bend over as opposed to using a hip hinge motion. So I'm going to move this table out of the way and kind of show you what this looks like from a form and technique standpoint. For some people, you will have them actually using their lumbar spine in order to reach over to pick up something. So let's pretend that there's something on the ground there that I want to pick up. Improper form would have us actually using our lumbar spine, rounding at the spine. Do you see what's happening to my spine right here as I do this? And trying to continue to round that spine to get me closer to the ground, okay? So that right there, improper technique. We don't want to use our spine to do that. Actually, what we want to do is use what we call the hip hinge motion. And the hip hinge does not occur at our spine and our waist. It occurs at our hip. It's actually occurring at what we call the ball and socket joint for the hip, okay? So where our femoral neck actually articulates with our pelvis. I like to use the analogy of, if I face forward here, if I had a rod going through my hips here, straight rod, and somebody was able to turn that rod, what would that motion look like? Okay, so the rod isn't up here, the rod is actually here at my hips. So if I turn to the side and show you what happens, somebody has that rod here and turns the rod, look what just happened. My hip shifted backwards in order for that rod to twist. Okay, so now if we twist, if we use the hip hinge motion here, now I can more safely get to the ground. Look what happened to my back. I'm not arched at my back here using my lumbar spine to flex forward. I am turning once again at the hips to lean forward to get whatever is on the ground. The other thing to keep in mind here is if I were to get something on the ground, I may not want to use a deadlift the entire time. I might actually want to use a more squat motion. But even with our squat motion, the main emphasis in a squat is going to be to push those hips back. So once again, I do still have a hip hinge happening, but now as I'm using a squat motion, more bend in the knees, right? Keeping the chest up, I can now safely pick up that object. And in order to stand myself back up, I don't use my low back. I squeeze my glutes to get back to my standing position. As you can see, a lot of this has to do with proper form and technique when we are bending over to pick something off the ground or maybe even to get down to the ground. It's simply unrealistic to expect that any human even a human with osteoporosis, is never going to forward bend again in their lives. We have got to make sure that we are utilizing proper form and technique and using our hips to do a lot of that motion as opposed to our low back. So, with that said, forward bending is not bad. We just have to make sure we're using the proper technique when we do it. All right, so moving on to myth number 2, which is that high impact exercise increases fracture risk. Ooh, this one's a doozy because technically we need high impact movements in order to help build bone mineral density. Your impact movements are going to have the highest quote unquote impact. I know, pun completely intended there, on building your bone mineral density when it comes to forms of exercise. So we do need impact. But here's the kicker: high impact for one person may not be high impact for somebody else. Just like low impact exercise for one person may not be low impact for someone else. It really is truly going to depend on your current fitness level and your prior fracture history. If you do have a history of fractures, whether it's in the lumbar spine, the hip region, etc., then your amount of impact is going to be less than somebody without those particular prior fractures and somebody with a higher fitness level. So when we talk about impact, for me, the biggest thing here to keep in mind is progression. You want to start small, you want to start light, you want to start low impact, and you want to progress to whatever moderate and high impact looks like for you. So, for instance, I'm going to move this table out of the way once again. Let's talk about what marching in place going up to a jog might look like. Now, for somebody with a prior history of fractures, we may have them marching in place. We may have them stomping in place, and this may be where they stop. That might be considered high impact for somebody based on their prior medical history. If they have had fractures in the past, then stomping in place may be considered a high impact movement for them. On the flip side, somebody who's never had any fractures in the past and might have a higher fitness level, that's going to be fairly easy for them. That may not be impact to them. You know why? Because their bones are used to more impact. And because their bones are used to more impact, you have got to give it a little bit higher impact in order to build the osteoblasts, in order to build the bone mineral density. Okay. So this is all going to be personalized. Once again, that person with fractures, right, stomping in place, that might be high impact for them. Somebody else might need to jog in place in order to get higher impact. Somebody else might need to do tuck jumps in order to get high impact. It truly depends on the individual. So when we use the word high impact, we really need to stop and look at the individual person with osteoporosis. What is their prior history of fractures and what is their current fitness level? Once you understand that, the person needs to understand that progression is the most important part. Just like with strength training, we have to be able to progress our impact movements to a place that is appropriate for our fitness level and doesn't cause us to cross that line into fracture risk. So, myth debunked. Myth number 3 is very interesting because it's a myth, but at the same time, it's kind of true. So I hope as I explain this, it'll make sense to you. So the myth is that weight machines are safer than free weights. This is technically true. However, let me explain how this all fits in with bone health and osteoporosis. So if you have somebody who is brand new to strength training, never really lifted a weight in their life, and maybe they don't have access to a personal trainer, I always encourage that person to start with the weight machines at their local gym. And there's a couple of reasons for this. One, they are technically safer. And what makes them safer is the fact that you're only able to go in one plane of motion for most of those machines. You're not able to do a bunch of different motions, which keeps it safer. It means that you're not moving freely in space and time, which is good for a beginner. They're also safer because you don't have to pick up a heavy weight to get it into a certain position to do the move. So, for example, if you are at the gym and you're doing the leg extension machine, which helps with strength in the quadricep muscles, you don't have to lift 80 pounds of weights before you can even do that movement. All you've got to do is do that selector pin, right? Put it at the 80-pound mark, and then sit there and extend your legs, right? All you got to do. You don't have to worry about getting that weight and lifting that amount of weight in order to do the movement. So it makes it so much safer, makes it easier for the beginner. Now, everything that I just mentioned, the fact that you don't have to move in multiple planes of motion and you don't have to lift the weights, that makes those machines safer. But those exact reasons that they are safer is what makes them not great for us when it comes to progression, when it comes to us getting to the point where we actually want to build bone mineral density. Bone mineral density is not going to be built in those machines, okay? And why? Because in order to actually get the osteoblast activity that we need in the bones, we need functional movement. We need movement where our body is moving not just in one plane of motion, but in multiple planes of motion. And we can't do that with machines. We can do that with free weights. So free weights, I want you to think of your free weights as what you're going to be progressing to. If you need to start with machines, do that. Start with your machines, but then know that as you get stronger and as you get more comfortable and more confident in your movements, you want to eventually make that movement a functional movement. You want to be able to do that movement with free weights. So if you are at the gym and you're using the leg press machine, it's a great machine to help mimic what happens when you're on the ground doing a squat. So it's a great way to start. But once again, you're not having to move in multiple planes of motion to do that leg press machine. You're basically just going one way, right? We're flexing and extending, and that's about it. However, when we do a squat, because of the hip motion, because of the hip hinge, because of the bend at the knees, we get to move in more planes, but we also get to make that a more compound movement, meaning more muscles are activated in order for us to do that particular move. We want to be able to get to the free weights, ladies and gentlemen, so we can have more functional movement. The more functional our movements are, the better chance we have of actually building bone mineral density. So technically saying the term free weight or saying that weight machines are safer than free weights, that is technically true, but we're not looking for safer all the time. We are looking for safety. Don't get me wrong. We're always looking for safety. But in this case, we don't want to just stay there in that machine realm. We want to know that the machines are giving us the confidence to eventually move forward and get into our dumbbells, our kettlebells, our barbells, etc. So, don't know that I necessarily debunked that myth, but hopefully I made it more clear to you as to why we can start with machines, but eventually progress to our free weights. Myth number 4 is right up there with never forward bending again. And that is that all rotational movements are contraindicated, AKA never twist again. Well, let's think about it. Going back to that forward bend, is it really realistic that we as humans are never going to rotate again in our lives? That's not realistic, is it? We rotate every day. We rotate in the bed. We rotate once we get up and start moving throughout our day. It's just a part of it. Plus, it's one of the planes of motion. We call that the transverse plane, the one that causes us and allows us to rotate from side to side. Now, this once again goes back to prior medical history and do you have a history of fractures in the lumbar spine? If that is the case, or if you have rounding of the spine in other areas, so let's say maybe in the thoracic region you have rounding, we call that kyphosis. If you have rounding in certain areas, then there may be certain rotational movements, especially with flexion, that we want to avoid. But to say that all twisting motions are off the table is definitely a myth. We just have to make sure that any type of rotation we do is with, once again, good form and technique and with intention. Why are we twisting that way? Is there a better way to do that particular motion? For example, if I've got something on the ground that's over here, is it better for me to twist like this to go to pick it up? Or can I put my body in a better position where I'm straight on with the object and then I can pick it up? A lot of times we have to stop and think about that when it comes to rotation. A lot of rotational injuries happen because we go to pick up something or do something when a better motion or a better movement could have been done. So always stop and think about what you're about to do before you do it, right? Now, some things are subconscious. If you feel like you're falling and you're twisting to avoid a certain way of landing, some of those things are just instinctual. We're not going to stop and think about that. But throughout your day, stop and think about how you're about to pick up something, how you're about to move your body to do something, and decide, is there a better way? Is there a more straightforward way for me to do this so I don't run the risk of not just tweaking a muscle, but for some people, actually creating a fracture somewhere? This does not mean that all twisting motions create fractures, because they don't. If that were the case, then everybody would be running around with fractures in their spine, but we're not. So with that said, some rotation is good. It just has to be intentional. A lot of times, if we are doing rotation where it's just strict rotation, then we're going to be good to go. We also want to keep our feet in mind. So I like to think of torso twists. Torso twists can be really good motions. So this right here might be a basic motion for some person. But the one thing that is problematic about this is that my feet are not helping me and my hips are not helping me in this particular motion. Everything is happening in the area of my lumbar spine. So if I do want to twist this way, what would be a better way for me to go to that direction? Maybe by utilizing my feet. By rotating on the balls of my feet, now I can twist in that same motion. But guess where that rotation is coming from now? Now the rotation is actually happening at the hips, not necessarily happening here at the lumbar region. A lot of times we simply need to stop and think about, where's that rotation coming from? Last but not least is pain. If you are doing any type of rotational movement that causes pain, you got to stop. Pain is usually an indicator that, yeah, you're about to do something that's not going to be good for your body. So we're going to stop that. Another way to listen to our body when it comes to twisting motions is to decrease range of motion. We don't have to twist all the way around in order to get some benefit from there, right? I can do this motion right here and still get benefit mainly in the hip, but I'm also going to get some benefit in the abdominal region, in the lumbar region, etc. All right. So a lot of times what we're going to say is listen to your body. If you don't have prior fractures, then some rotation is going to be good. If you have prior fractures or if you have curvatures of the spine, then make sure you're listening to anything that Doc has said as far as certain movements to avoid. But all twisting motions are not off the table, everybody. Remember, the human body has to twist. So we're going to make sure that we do it in a safe manner. Last but not least is myth number 5. And that is that any exercise or workout that is challenging enough for us to build bone is too dangerous. So this goes back to the concept of, where are you starting from? What is your baseline? How are you coming to exercise? Are you a veteran of exercise and you've done so many different forms of exercise that your body's used to that? Or are you a newbie? Are you somebody who's gotten most of their exercise from walking throughout their lives? You haven't done a lot of balance or impact or strength training. Depending on where you're starting from is really going to determine whether an exercise is challenging or not challenging, okay? A workout for me that's challenging may not be challenging for somebody who's got a higher fitness level than me, and vice versa. An exercise that I find not challenging at all may be very challenging for somebody who's a newbie. So this really has to do with where you are starting and what your baseline is. The next thing to keep in mind with this particular myth is that We all, no matter what type of exercise you're doing, we're all aiming for progressive overload, because whether it's muscles, bones, etc., all of them only get better if you are progressing the load that's being put on them in a nice, slow, steady, timely manner. So, if I can lift a certain amount of weight in a squat, that may not be the weight that a beginner is going to use. A beginner may simply use body weight to do their squats. And then over time, meaning weeks and months, they're going to slowly add weight to that. Okay. It's that slow addition of weight, the progression, that's going to cause them to not only get stronger with their muscles, but to improve their bone mineral density. You cannot improve your muscular strength or your bone health by staying with easy workouts. They have to be challenging at some point. But just keep in mind that what's challenging for you may not be challenging for somebody else, and vice versa. This all comes back to the individual and what they deem as challenging. Now, how do you know when to progress things? I've got other videos on that, but a quick tip is when it becomes easy, and it's been easy for at least a week, maybe even 2 weeks, you're going to have to up the ante. So whether that's increasing your repetitions of something, increasing the time you're doing something, increasing the weight or the load of a particular exercise, et cetera, et cetera. Those are just quick examples of how you're going to progress so that those movements and those exercises do become more challenging for you. But if you stay in your comfort zone, ladies and gentlemen, you are not going to get stronger. You are not going to improve your bone health. So just keep in mind that challenging for you may not be what you think it is. It may not be these exercises that you see out there that you feel like you'll never be able to do. A great example of this is the Lift More study. The Lift More study had some great results, and those movements and what it found in that particular study are very applicable to people wanting to improve their bone health, especially those with osteoporosis. But does that mean that a woman who has never lifted before in her life is going to start off doing back squats with a 45-pound barbell? No, that is not where she's going to start. It may not even be where she ends up. And do you know why? Because she may find that along the way, body weight squats are challenging. And then adding 10-pound dumbbells is challenging. And then adding 15-pound dumbbells is challenging. It may be that challenging for her is always going to be maybe in the dumbbell region. Maybe she never gets to a barbell. But with every squat she's doing, she's becoming stronger. She is making her muscles stronger. She is improving her bone health, right? And why? Because she's progressing. That workout, that particular movement is getting more challenging over time. And that is what we're looking for. Once again, challenging, using that word is very specific to the individual. What you find challenging may not be for somebody else, and vice versa. So you are looking for challenge in your workouts, whether it's strength training, impact exercises, balance exercises. You're looking for challenge. But just know that your baseline is not somebody else's baseline. Don't compare yourself to somebody else with the same diagnosis. Use your baseline to be just that. It's where you're going to start, and promise yourself that you're going to progress in a slow and steady rate, and watch that progression make you a stronger person. So as we wrap this up, there are 3 things that I want to touch on and make sure they're clear in this video. The first is always follow your doctor's recommendations. Your doctors hopefully know your medical history better than anybody else. But remember, you're working in collaboration with your doctor. If your doctor says no to particular exercises, don't be afraid to ask them why. Get a clear explanation as to why you can't do that move. So now you understand and you can find alternatives to get the same benefits. The second thing is form and technique in all you do when it comes to exercise is number 1. It trumps everything else. Do not worry about all the fancy equipment. Don't worry about how much you're lifting. Your form and technique in every single movement is what's going to keep you safe, and it's what's going to actually build the muscular strength that you're looking for. If you are doing a movement improperly, not only are you increasing your chance of getting injured, but you're not even going to be working the correct muscle groups. So if you're not working the correct muscle groups, how can you get stronger in the area that you want to? So do not forget, form a technique over everything else. Once you know your form and technique is down, feel free to progress with weights, etc. If you are not comfortable with your form and technique, this is the time to hire a personal trainer. They do not have to be an expert in osteoporosis. They simply have to be somebody who can show you that, hey, this is the correct way to do a deadlift, a squat, etc. So remember, form and technique trumps everything else. Last but not least, day one matters. Your baseline matters. And your baseline is just that, it's yours. I said it a few minutes ago. Don't compare yourself to somebody else. Your day one is simply where you're starting at. Promise yourself that you're going to slowly and steadily increase what you do over time, because that progression, whether it's strength training, impact, balance, it's where you're going to see the best results. And if you are truly here to improve your bone health, you have to progress. Just keep in mind, always remember that your progression is going to look different than somebody else with the exact same diagnosis. And that's it, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this week's MythBuster episode, and I will see you next time for another hot topic. Have a good one.